The instant her heart stopped, silence took over. There were no more sounds, no more breath. Just an absolute emptiness, as if the world had been suddenly ripped away. Imagine feeling life slipping through your fingers, unable to hold on to it. That was your last breath. Many believe that death comes as a rest, but what happens when, upon closing your eyes, you find not peace, but an endless abyss? Today you will learn about a real and disturbing experience, the account of someone who died for a few minutes and crossed the border between life and eternity. What he saw was not light, not comfort, but rather a place of darkness, despair, and pain. A place where time does not exist and hope is ripped from the soul. Prepare yourself, because this story is not just another scary tale. It's a warning, a call to reflect on what may lie beyond the last heartbeat. If you think you've heard it all about near-death experiences, this account will challenge your convictions. So before we dive into this amazing testimony, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Because what you're about to discover could change the way you see life, and what comes after it. Immediately after the final heartbeat, came the sensation of displacement, as if the ground had disappeared and all that remained was an endless plunge. It wasn't wind, it wasn't speed. It was a silent fall that took away any sense of direction. The body no longer existed, and yet consciousness perceived every detail. The heavy air, the heat that came not from any source, but from the place itself. The darkness was not merely the absence of light. It was an active, living presence, pressing like invisible hands on the chest, and with the darkness came sound. First, a whisper, then voices, then screams. They didn't echo like in an empty corridor. They took shape, came from all sides, pierced the soul. They were the cries of people who once had names and faces, now reduced to pain without a history. Each scream seemed to carry a lost memory, an unresolved regret, a plea that no one heard. The heat transformed into a presence. It burned without flames, suffocated without smoke. It was a weight, a burden, a reminder that there was no breath there. Each attempt to find air only encountered more density, more pressure, more absence. The place gradually revealed itself, not as a backdrop, but as a certainty. There were no doors, no sky, no reliable ground. There were fields of shadows that moved as if they had a will of their own, cracks that opened and closed without logic, and distances that seemed to multiply the closer one tried to get. The sensation of falling became rhythm. Between one now and another, flashes of anguished faces appeared, empty eyes that didn't ask for help because they no longer believed in it. Hope there was a strange word, almost offensive. Every fiber of their being understood. This was a place of permanent loss. Instinct drove the search for any opening, any direction, but every choice turned into a return. It was like walking in circles within a night that knew its name, that knew its fears and repeated them like a chorus. Often, the impulse was to scream as well, but the scream wouldn't come out. The voice itself seemed to have been taken away. And when for a moment, silence threatened to erupt, it was replaced by a deep, distant lament, reminiscent of a sad song never finished, without beginning, without end. A warning that time did not pass there, it only weighed heavily. Among the shadows, there were presences that didn't touch but wounded. They weren't clear figures, they were intentions. Faceless gazes, wordless judgments, memories of guilts that perhaps were once small, now amplified until they became walls. The pain wasn't physical, and yet it pierced like a blade. And the relentless heat said what the screams didn't need to say. There was no solace there. There, every thought was a vicious cycle, every emotion another descent. The fall didn't end, it only deepened. It was then that something inside cried out for a name greater than ruin itself, not as a ritual, not as a formula, as a desperate impulse from someone who recognizes they cannot save themselves. The plea went unheard, or did it? The answer came without sound. It came in absence for a moment, a brief, almost imperceptible pause in the screams, a minimal breath in the heat. It wasn't light yet, it was a promise, fragile, distant, but enough to prevent complete collapse. And then the place responded, with greater fury. The shadows drew closer like waves, the heat intensified, the laments turned into a storm. Hell was not a stage, it was a continuous intention of rupture. The heart, if it still existed, would have failed there. And yet, in the midst of the chaos, something persisted, a question that wouldn't be silenced. Is there anyone? The question repeated itself insistently, not as doubt, but as a spark. In a realm where everything was pain, the question was the first act of resistance. The fall continued, despair grew. And without warning, A distant point seemed to vibrate, as if the abyss itself had, for a second, remembered the light. There, time did not exist, not as a measure but as a weight. There was no yesterday, no tomorrow, only an endless dense now that repeated itself like a cycle without doors. Each second seemed to stretch until it tore apart comprehension itself. The torment didn't come in waves. It was a state, an atmosphere that clung to the consciousness like a fire that doesn't consume, only persists. All around, everything affirmed the same sentence: there is no escape. And this certainty, more than the heat, more than the screams, was what crushed him. The mind searched for memories to anchor itself to, but they appeared distorted, like reflections in red-hot metal. What once seemed insignificant became an accusation. Mistakes that seemed small grew, occupied space, repeated themselves like voices that knew exactly where to wound. The steps that tried to move returned to the same place. And each return was like a verdict: still here. Always here. The absence of a horizon was as real as the presence of pain. There was no sky that could be reached, no path that promised relief. Despair became almost a physical posture, the natural inclination of the soul towards collapse. The air was heavy, and even the act of thinking seemed like a doomed effort. Asking for help was like shouting into a well where the walls swallow the sound and return only a weary echo. There were invisible gazes, like suspended judgments. You couldn't see who was accusing, but you could feel the sentence. The certainty was absolute. The place was alive, charged with reminding everyone that their hope was not only forbidden, it was ridiculous. Attempts to believe were cut down by the same blade: no one will come. And that phrase, never spoken, was the loudest cry. Eternity there was not prolonged time, it was time denied. The internal clock seemed to have been disassembled and reassembled to function without hands. Nothing advanced, nothing ended. The urge to give up ran up against a cruel paradox. Give up on what, if there is no end? The condemnation had no boundary, it was the landscape itself. Wherever you looked, there was confirmation. Wherever you dared to imagine, there was rupture. At some point, consciousness tried to resist with a simple act, naming a hope, even without seeing it. Not as a strategy, but as persistent despair, almost stubbornness. It was then that the place responded with silence. Not the silence that brings peace, but the silence that multiplies the weight. No sound, no crackling flame. Only dense presence. The heart, if it still pulsed on some hidden plane, would have hesitated. And at the peak of collapse, when the soul felt it could no longer support its own weight, something tiny trembled, like a timid breeze in a burning desert. It was not light, it was not a voice. It was a faint memory of mercy, so weak it seemed invented. The abyss's reaction was immediate: more heat, more fury, more denial. As if eternity itself were defending against any trace of redemption. Even so, that spark, almost non-existent, refused to die. It wasn't progress, it wasn't relief, it was persistence. And the exhausted soul clung to it, not out of courage, but out of lack of alternative. If everything is loss, any hint of meaning becomes resistance. Despair continued relentlessly, time remained non-existent, cruel. However, for the first time, eternity encountered an obstacle, a tiny hope, in contradiction with hell. A tense equilibrium formed, and in the midst of the chaos, something invisible began to approach. At the throes of collapse, when consciousness could no longer bear the weight of infinity, something cut through the night like a blade of mercy. It didn't come as an explosion, but as a disarming presence. First, a timid light, almost impossible in that place. Then, a firm, irresistible advance that asked no permission. The darkness retreated like a wounded animal. The heat, once absolute, wavered. And for the first time, the air seemed breathable. The light was not merely brightness. It was concrete peace that did not spread like wildfire, but settled within, calming all that was at war. Where it touched, the cries lost their power, as if pain itself had forgotten how to express itself. There was authority there, not of threat, but of one who knows the end from the beginning. Every shadow seemed to recognize its arrival and, to the same extent, fear it. In the center of that clarity, a figure emerged. There was no crown, no theatrical spectacle. There was simple majesty. The presence was unmistakable: Jesus. Not as an idea or a distant memory, but as a living, near reality. He reached out his hand amidst the flames, and they seemed to bend, as if that gesture contained an order that hell could not contest. Time, which had been non-existent until then, organized itself around this approach. Her voice didn't need to be loud, It pierced through completely. There was authority, the kind that silences storms, and love, the kind that doesn't negotiate, only finds and saves. Each word sounded as if spoken to a specific heart, to a unique story. There was no accusation, there was a call, and soon the fall stopped. The despair, still present, lost its title of master. The touch didn't burn, it healed. A peace that wasn't evasion, but truth, filled the space. The past, with its mistakes and guilt, didn't disappear, it was reoriented. As if a new map were handed over with paths that didn't exist before. It's not the end yet. The phrase didn't promise ease, it promised purpose. And the purpose, there, was redemption. The shadows tried to fight back, and the place responded with fury, as if trying to prevent the impossible. But the light didn't compete, it simply won. Not through brute force, but through nature. Where she stood, chaos lost its identity, the heat receded like an ancient memory. Hell seemed distant, even though it was near. And the outstretched hand firm invited, come. In accepting, there was no violent rupture, only a transition. A gentle yet definitive shift, like crossing a door that had always been there, invisible. The night did not disappear, but it lost the right to define destiny. The heart, if it still had breath, found its rhythm. The weary soul found rest without escape. In his presence, questions fell silent not for lack of answers, but because the answer was a person. An authority that does not humiliate, love that does not relativize, truth that liberates without hurting. And when the infernal world was left behind as a memory, the mission ignited like a new flame. There is something to accomplish on Earth. Something urgent, specific, that cannot be postponed. The light continued guiding. It didn't promise the absence of pain, but it promised companionship. It didn't guarantee easy paths, but it guaranteed direction. And at the end of that encounter, a certainty replaced the terror. There is no abyss beyond his reach. Chaos may scream, despair may persist, but when he appears, the night learns its limit. The return was near, but there was still a battle, still a scar. But there was also a call that sounded like life itself. Come back. There are people to love, stories to touch, a mission waiting for your yes. The light that broke through the darkness now pointed to a new dawn, and nothing, not even the whole of hell, could stop the next step. The shift wasn't abrupt, it was decisive. Like someone rescued from drowning by hands that know every current, consciousness crossed the threshold of torment and found a breath of fresh air that hadn't existed there before. Relief came first as silence, then as presence. The crushing weight dissolved like dust in the sun. It was impossible to mistake. Care was taken in every detail of this rescue. It wasn't escape, it was redemption. His closeness changed everything. Where before there had been accusation, now there was a gaze that understood without excuses. The memory of hell hadn't disappeared, but it had been put into perspective, like a page that doesn't define the entire book. It's not the end yet. The phrase was short and, at the same time, absolute. It wasn't about returning a life to more of the same. It was about entrusting a mission. And a mission is different from mere survival. The touch was light, but it brought order where ruin reigned. Pain gained a name, fear lost its authority. The heart, if it was still trying to recognize its own rhythm, received a purpose that beat stronger than any doubt. There was something to accomplish on Earth. Not a favor, not a generic plan, a specific calling, a work that could only happen through someone who had seen what almost no one sees and returns to tell the tale. The past was presented as raw material, not as a prison. The wounds, previously used as grounds for condemnation, became points of contact with those who also bleed. You don't come back the same. The warning was not a threat, it was a promise. The experience was not punishment, it was a calling. The rescue did not end at the exit from the abyss, it began there. Because mission is a journey, not a reward. And the journey demands daily choices. There was revelation without spectacle, simple, profound truths, spoken as if one knows every human shadow. Love without negotiation, forgive without bargaining, speak without fear, live as one who has seen the other side. The call wasn't for perfection, it was for availability. The light didn't demand heroism, it asked for dedication. There are people waiting for what you carry. The phrase found space where before there was only despair. Relief turned into responsibility, and responsibility, far from crushing, liberated. As if life were returned with a new manual, and each chapter revealed a prepared encounter. Tell what you saw. Not to frighten, but to awaken. the memory of hell would become a testimony of mercy. Rescue a bridge, revelation, a map. Before leaving, there was a seal peace, not the peace of one who forgets, but the peace of one who has been found. A silent certainty took the place of panic. And along with it, a serene urgency to return. There are choices to correct, bonds to restore, steps to align. The mission was not a stage, it was a table. It was not applause, it was service. As the scenery began to dissolve like mist at dawn, a final glance affirmed what no shadow could deny: you are not alone. The return would be real, the struggle would continue, but the companionship would be constant. And with that promise etched deep within, the journey was complete. The body waited, the earth called, and life, now with purpose, would resume its course, not to flee from what had happened, but to transform with what had been revealed. Because redemption does not end in salvation, it flourishes in mission. And the first step was about to happen. The impact was sudden, like a deep drum resonating in the void. The heart began to beat again. First, a timid rhythm, then a firm, non-negotiable beat, summoning presence to the body. The air rushed in as if opening doors locked for centuries, the lungs inflated, and each cell recognized an ancient command: to live. The eyes, previously still, searched for shapes, lights, faces. Nothing was the same, nothing could be. The first thought was not human, it was sacred. The memory of the hand that rescues still burned, not as pain, but as a seal. The weight of hell had left an invisible scar, one of those that reorganize the soul. It was no longer possible to call the everyday normal. Every second now carried a certain density, as if time had gained its own nerve, its own attention. The simple act of breathing became an act of obedience. All around, voices, machines, hurried footsteps, life insisting on its routine. Inside, another routine was beginning, a purpose. Certainty didn't shout, it settled in: there is work. Not to prove something, but to accomplish something. The mission was not a spiritual ornament, it was a blazing road, traversing memories, relationships, choices. Hell, which had previously seemed absolute, was transformed into testimony. And testimony demanded movement. The body ached where one awakens from afar, and fatigue did not hinder, but rather guided. Each gesture carried reverence. Touching a hand, looking into someone's eyes, saying, "I am here," all of this was liturgy. Because those who see the abyss learn that presence is a miracle. And those who are rescued learn that miracles require commitment. Not a single word was wasted. Not a single minute would be left to chance. Questions arose, fears emerged, whispers of doubt lingered. Why me? The answer didn't come as theory. It came as a memory of light piercing the night. It wasn't about merit, it was about mission. You returned to love where you failed, to speak where you were silent, to forgive where you resisted. The list was short and endless. The eternal mark was not a recurring vision, but an impulse that cannot be negotiated. In the following days, each sunrise felt like a calling. There were people carrying shadows they never confessed, stories waiting for a word that wouldn't humiliate them. There were carefully planned, delicate, and decisive encounters. The heart, now beating with a new rhythm, became a compass, drawing closer when it was time to care, tightening its grip when it was time to witness, and quieting down when it was time to listen. There was no glamour, just consistency, small choices, big results. An apology that reopens paths. A visit that dispels loneliness. A silence that protects. And at key moments, the firm voice, "I have seen what lies beyond," is not meant to frighten, but to awaken. Not to condemn, but to summon. The rescue had not ended in that room. It unfolded in every gesture that chose life. At night, when memory dared to bring warmth from the other side, peace responded, "You are not alone." The hand that rescued you did not withdraw, it accompanies you. And with this certainty, fear lost its function. The future ceased to be a nebulous figure and became sowing ground. Each second, counted as a gift, each encounter, treated as a mission. The heart keeps beating, the air keeps flowing in, and life, now with a name and direction, moves forward. And if someone asks what has changed, the answer will come effortlessly: everything. Because those who have gone to the bottom and returned know that purpose is not a concept, it's a rhythm. And this rhythm, once begun, allows no return to the old. It is marching, it is surrender, it is grace in motion, and the next step begins now. Thus ends yet another impressive account of someone who crossed the border between life and death, who felt the weight of hell and, in the darkest moment, was rescued by the light. An experience that leaves no doubt. Every second we have here on Earth carries a greater purpose, and ignoring that is wasting the chance to live fully and consciously. But now I want to talk to you who followed this story to the end. If this testimony moved you, if it sparked reflection or even gave you chills, don't let it go unnoticed. Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories. Each video here presents real-life experiences that can transform the way you see life, death, and what lies beyond. Please also leave a like, as this helps spread these messages to more people who need to hear stories like this. And write in the comments what you felt during this narrative. Fear, hope, curiosity? Your opinion is very important and may even inspire other people who are looking for answers. And if you were intrigued by what happens after the last breath, I invite you to also watch the other videos on the channel. Each story is a dive into profound mysteries, into experiences that defy logic and remind us that there is much more than meets the eye. So don't leave without exploring further. The journey doesn't end with this video. It has only just begun.